All right, the December 1st, 2020 meeting of the Hillsborough County Charter Review Board is hereby called to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Can we have the clerk please do the roll call attendance?
Narain?
Yes. Present?
Barry?
Present.
Bryant?
Present.
Delaverne?
Press.
Fig?
Mrs. Fig, I believe you're muted.
I'm here.
Fox?
Here.
Johnson? Johnson?
Here.
Mueller?
Here.
Scarola?
Present.
Shaw?
Here.
Stewart? I didn't get that. Stewart?
Here.
Thank you. Thrower?
Here.
Wood? Wood? Yates?
Here.
Thank you. You have a quorum.
Thank you. We do, but we don't. At this time, I wanted to ask if we have any public comments. Any comments from the public? There are public comments. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to our monthly Charter Review Board meeting. It is indeed nice to see all of you. Hopefully you all had a great Thanksgiving holiday. Some of you I am seeing in person. So to those of you who are here in person, welcome to the Matrix. To those of you who are online, hello. If you can't tell, we are in individually enclosed glass. It is almost like Superman 2. Anyway, I'm dating myself. You sure are. But just wanted to say thank you for those of you who were able to make it out tonight and those of you who are online. Because this is a new system, I'm going to ask that we all use the virtual system to raise our hand. So those of you who are here in person, we're going to still use the virtual system to kind of go in order. Keep in mind that the sound, the way that it travels is if someone is talking and another person is talking, only one of those voices is going to come through. So we need to be, patient and take our time tonight in order for everything to get properly recorded. Other than that, unfortunately, we do not have a quorum because we're missing the 8 that we need in person. We're short by 1 person tonight. So we are, again, just going to discuss these issues. We won't be able to take an official vote on anything that will actually have effect until the next meeting when hopefully we have at least 8 people in person. With all of that said, thank you all very much again for your sacrifice in being here. I'm going to jump right into the agenda. Tonight, we have with us our county administrator, Ms. Bonnie Wise, who is with us virtually. We're going to have her give a quick presentation, and then we'll open up the floor for any questions. Ms. Wise, thank you for joining us tonight. The floor is yours.
Chairman, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, very good. It's nice to see some familiar faces and some new faces as well. I want to thank you for inviting me here today to speak to you. As I was thinking about speaking to you tonight, I realize that today is my 5-month anniversary in this job, and it has been a whirlwind of an experience the past 5 months, as you can probably imagine. And as you speak about sitting on the 26th floor there, I call those areas little aquariums. That's what I feel like when I'm sitting in that enclosed glass over there. We have a lot of plexiglass throughout the county in various places. So that's what we have been doing a lot of in order to keep the public and to keep our employees safe. So I have been with the county, however, in this job for 5 months, as I said, but I've been with the county a little over 9 years. And my prior experience, I was a chief financial administrator and oversaw the budget office, procurement, human resources, economic development, various other departments, and had that experience. And prior to that, I was the City of Tampa's chief financial officer under Mayor Iorio for her 2 terms, and had the abilities to work with the mayor and her team there. Prior to that, I was in the private sector, and I was an investment banker, financial advisor, and working in the area of public finance. So all my clients were governments, and Hillsborough County was one of my clients many years ago. The city of Tampa was not, but Hillsborough County was. And I had a lot of clients throughout the west coast of Florida, and also concentrated on affordable housing as well during that career. And so I think that my experience both in the private sector and the public sector has been a very good balance. So it's been about half, about 16 years in the private sector, and then have had the opportunity to serve the public at the city of Tampa and then here. And then it's really been in exciting times. We have, of course, a lot of challenges before us in Hillsborough County, many challenges that existed well before the pandemic, whether it's affordable housing or land use issues or transportation of various other issues. And then, of course, enter a pandemic that just really, what did we think about? 8 months ago, we didn't even really think much about, or 9 months ago, maybe. And so I have seen the Hillsborough County employees be outstanding. It has been a remarkable work effort from every department that we have at the county. Everybody at the county is doing their job differently. Whether a person is in fire rescue, or whether they're in aging services, or whether they're in libraries, this pandemic has impacted everything we do, as you can see right now, everything we do. Whether somebody is in the paving roads, it has changed all of our protocols and how we do our business. And we have been fortunate that we received $256 million from the federal government for the CARES dollars. And we have had the opportunity to utilize those funds throughout the community to help our citizens and help our businesses. So we have put out really in a very short time. Government, we are used to planning and being very methodical in how we execute our projects, but we were blessed and we received the $256 million, I think it was in April, and that money had to be spent on COVID-related activities through the end of December. And so it couldn't have been anything that we had previously budgeted. So we have put it through good use, and we report to the board at every board meeting. We feel that this is an obligation we have to report to the board, to report to the taxpayers of how we're spending these monies. And we share it with our local legislators as well. And for the local level and at the national level, we want to be good stewards of those dollars, and for everybody to see very transparently what we're doing in the community. So we've put forward about $94 million for small businesses and for training for people. We have provided housing and utility assistance, almost $38 million. And we have also shared these monies with our city partners. Our partners, our cities also are struggling, of course. And although these programs that we did that I mentioned for the economic development recovery and for the housing and utility assistance, they are countywide programs, but our cities have expenses too that have impacted them. We've put monies toward nonprofits. We've put monies toward venues in the community. We want people to be working. We want people to be working in a safe environment. So whatever we can do in that regard. We just finished hurricane season. We almost made it throughout this hurricane season without a storm. It was really close. Enter tropical storm / Hurricane Ada. And we had, 2 emergency orders going on at the same time. And it was, for me as county administrator, my first storm in that role. And I, once again, couldn't be more proud of our emergency management staff, how they were so well prepared, especially in a COVID environment. You think about something maybe not so simple as sheltering our citizens if needed. And we did open 5 shelters during Hurricane Ada. And how we shelter people during a COVID time period is different. And for every shelter we would have needed before, we need 3 because of the distancing that's required. That's 3 times the staff, that's 3 times as many places. And that we worked very closely with the school district in order to execute those shelters. And some people did come to our shelters during that storm. We wanted people to be safe. We were certainly blessed. That storm could have been a whole lot worse. And if that storm had come in September, that storm would have been terrible the way it was coming up that path. But we were fortunate and we had minimal damage. But it gave us the opportunity to really test our systems and to make sure that we were prepared, and prepared we were. So now, December 1st, at least we're out of that part of the period. We have some challenges going forward as far as our budget constraints. Of course, the pandemic has impacted the obvious, sales tax, gas tax, tourist tax, those types of revenues. And some of those stressors, once again, existed prior to the pandemic and exacerbated from it. So we will be moving forward. However, we had presented a budget to the board and the board adopted a budget. We started the new budget year in October. And going forward, I'm excited because we are going to be going through a strategic planning effort, something that the board hasn't done in a while, and that will help guide how we budget going forward, and the board will set some priorities. I'm looking forward to embarking on that probably in January or February and have a consultant to take us through that process. So with that, I am happy to answer any questions about that, about my role, about myself, and look forward to working with you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wise. And again, members, I'll just remind you and ask that you use the virtual function in order to raise your hand. I see a hand for questions. And the first question, the floor is given to Mr. Shaw. Representative Shaw, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Wise, congratulations on your 5-month anniversary. So you may not have an answer for this, but the reason that I asked for this presentation was because there seems to be an inherent conflict between the mayor's office and the county administrator as to who can call for what. I've certainly been aware of times where there have been, for example, curfews, and the mayor would say that they have the power to call for a curfew, and the county administrator would respond and say, no, in fact, that power rested in the county administrator's office. Can you give some context as to that, and maybe if you can even speak to if there are maybe structural issues that are leading to these consistent conflicts between the mayor's office and the county administrator's office during some of these times?
Thank you. And well, for my extent, the mayor and I, this mayor and I have worked together before, and we stay in very close contact, and especially during this storm, this past storm, we were speaking often and speaking with our staff often. I think some of what had occurred was regarding a curfew, regarding the pandemic, but also I think in the past regarding hurricanes as far as whether there was going to be a requirement for people to evacuate. And I think that there was some miscommunications perhaps. And I think that I would work very closely with the county attorney's office to ensure that we had that all together. But where I have been with the mayor of Tampa, as well as the other mayors, is trying to maintain very good relationships and speaking to them along the way so that we don't have any of those miscommunications. I realize that in an emergency, maybe something could get missed, but I'm trying to develop those relationships now when it's a little bit calmer so that we always have those relationships going forward.
Shaw, you're recognized still.
Thank you. So do you believe then that the conflicts that I'm talking about resulted purely from miscommunication and did not result from some sort of needed clarification in the laws or regulations with regard to the powers of the mayor and the county administrator's office? You think that this is just a communications issue?
Well, I wasn't there, so I can't really speak to exactly what happened. And, but I'm not sure that there is any confusion in the law necessarily.
You recognize for series.
Okay, I appreciate that. Let me ask one more then. In the city of Tampa, in the city limits of Tampa, who has the authority to call for a curfew? Let me ask that question.
In the city of Tampa?
Yes.
Well, I think in let's talk about a COVID environment. I think that the city could, I believe that in a COVID environment, the city of Tampa could put in some rules for the city that don't conflict with county rules or ordinances, provided, of course, the governor has provided for that, let's say. So I think the cities do have some opportunities, provided it is not in conflict with what we are saying at the county level.
Just one more follow-up
Still
then.
recognized.
If your office took the position that a curfew was not needed, does the mayor have the power to still ask for a curfew within city limits?
It sounds like what you're describing is something that would be in conflict in that case. But if it was silent, I don't think it would be in conflict.
Thanks. Thank you.
Mr. Thrower, you're recognized for a series of questions if you have them.
Yes. Mrs. Wise, the question I have, just more open-ended. I'm curious, having worked for the county in a senior administrator position and now as the county administrator, if there's anything since we're here to look at the county charter, is there anything that you have any concerns with any of the sections or anything that you would like to see changed? Just like I said, I figured I'd ask the open-ended question since we're here.
I am not aware of any changes. I did, of course, review the charter, and I don't have any recommendations for changes at this time.
That's my question. Thank you.
All right, members, any other questions, please use the tool. And if you're done with the questions, I'll ask you to take your hands down in the system. This is a great time. Going once, twice, and this is not a shy group. You did a great job, Ms. Wise. All right.
Awkward, so sorry with the virtual and the in-person. I will say that from our communication standpoint, our communication staff has done an amazing job with all this virtual work, and this hybrid model is a little bit more complicated and difficult. So I appreciate your flexibility and everybody who's participating. We thank you.
Ms. Wise, we did have one slide in right here at the buzzer, so Mr. Johnson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And it's not for a question, but for a quick comment. I just wanted to be able to commend you and all the staff of the county for, the tremendous job that you've done in such in such a crazy time for everybody. I think that, I wanted to make sure that we let you know we appreciate you coming in here to do this, because you do have a lot on your plate right now between just, normal job functions for a brand new county administrator. So for you to be able to come in here and do this, we appreciate it. And, again, you and your staff have done a tremendous job for the county, and, I certainly thank you for that. That's all I had, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And Ms. Wise, congratulations again, and I would like to echo Mr. Johnson's sentiments. This has been a very difficult period for many of us, and we were talking about that prior to the meeting starting, and we can only imagine running a county as large as Hillsborough County through this pandemic with everything that's going on. But from what we know, you're the right person for the job, so we're looking forward to working with you.
Well, I very much appreciate those kind words. It's the 5,000 employees who work for Hillsborough County every day, so the credit is really to them. And I thank you for letting me go, because tomorrow is our first board meeting with our new board, and I am preparing for that. So thank you so much.
Thanks again. All right, members, we are going to move right into the term limits discussion that we started at the last meeting. Again, we have no effect that we can really take without a in-person quorum. So at this time, I believe Mary Helen's with us virtually. Ms. Cardenas is with us in person. If anybody has any further things that they wanted to discuss related to this topic, now would be the time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we can't take any action, but can someone walk me through the timeline if someone, when we do have a quorum, were to offer a motion to adopt some sort of language to close the so-called term limit loophole, what's the time line associated with that?
Great question. So I'm going to give you my interpretation, and then I'll ask if Beth or Mary Helen has something they want to add, to feel free to do that. But we have, basically, counting this meeting, 3 meetings, this one, January and February, before our time has ended. Anything that we decide to move forward, we would have to have at least 2 public meetings to ratify with the public before we take a final vote to put it on the ballot for 2022. That vote, out of the 14 members, we need to have at least 10 votes in order to move a proposal forward. So in effect, we have the ability as a board to call a called meeting if necessary, if there is an issue that we want to address before our time expires in February. And I don't know the exact date, if it's the end of the month of February or if it's at the first February meeting. That's where I'll need some clarification.
Jump in on that. Typically in the past, the charter says you meet for 1 year. So the clock starts ticking the first meeting of the Charter Review Board. You're right in that you can have additional meetings. There's nothing in the charter that would preclude you from doing that. So perhaps at the next meeting, if we do get the physical quorum, we can actually move forward on a proposition regarding the term limits, if that's the will of the board.
Or any other issue for that matter. I know we talked about bringing back up the district's issue at the last meeting, and that can certainly be placed on the agenda for the next meeting. Questions? Okay, floor is still open for any discussion on that particular issue. Mr. Thrower, I see your hand, but I think it's a remnant from the last discussion.
Nope. Let me,
And members online, I know you're not normally this quiet, so I'm double checking just to make sure that I'm not missing you. Wow, okay. Well, if there's no further discussion on this topic, Mr. Shaw, I see your hand again.
Sorry, thank you. I'm very talkative today. I guess I needed to be around people, so. Let me ask the attorney, Mary Ellen, if I can. Let's assume that I want to make a motion when we have a quorum to close this loophole. I'm looking at the language from the various counties here that was passed out. Do you have a suggestion on which one of these which of this county language would be the best, if any, to apply to Hillsborough if my intention was to close the term limit loophole?
I think any of those examples would work. You certainly could pick and choose. Typically, you'll see either a certain number of years served or a certain number of terms. Usually you see either consecutive terms. Often you'll see full terms because there might be a commissioner for whatever reason that drops out. So do you count that partial term against them? So those are the decisions that you need to make. I certainly can craft the language. All of these examples would work if that's what the board wants to do. So I'm just here to listen to input, and we'll certainly draft whatever language you guys think is the most appropriate.
All right, Ms. Delaverne, you're recognized.
I just wanted some clarification. Right now, we're just talking about term limits because I feel like they're two different issues. So I want to make sure when you said there's no other comment, you're just still talking about the term limits and not the district.
Yes, that is correct. We're strictly talking term limits.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Thrower?
You
you're
know,
recognized.
actually, and I may be going the same to the same topic that you're discussing in terms of, because I had a question concerning the information that was provided by Mrs. Ferris in terms of term limits, but it had to do with the single-member districts too. So I'll hold off on it for now.
All right, members, any other questions? Mr. Scarola?
Thank you,
You're
Mr.
recognized.
Chairman. I'm going to say this because I brought it up in the last meeting, and I don't think everybody was here. And I also noted in my comments previously that I'm not really on one side or the other of this issue of term limits. But having worked in Hillsborough County for 38 years through the land use system, that's my best example because I know it the best. Be careful of unintended consequences when you give your own thought to what this involves. Because in the case of land use, for example, we have a very complicated system, but understanding it, you come to learn that there's a lot of logic built into the system. And there's order and procedures that go through the system. And there's fantastic staff with many, many years of experience in the system. And all of that leads to certain evidence that makes its way to the Board of County Commissioners. And if you can imagine having a family farm or a house or whatever you'd like to call it, your property in Hillsborough County, and you've got the benefit of all of this expertise behind you, and then you place it in front of somebody that has no expertise in it, it has monumental consequences. And again, I like most of you engage in a lot of conversations with people almost daily who say, why do these people keep coming back into the system? So it's not like I'm unaware of it, but think of all the consequences, because I can tell you that when people come for decisions in front of Hillsborough County, they're looking for people who at least understand. They may not get the answer they like, but they want to make sure that the people that are making the decision understand their own system. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Representative Fig. You're recognized.
Sounds like you can't hear me.
We hear you now. You're muted again. Mrs. Fig?
Apparently, I'm not going to be speaking.
We can hear you.
Okay. I'd like to take issue with statements about term limits. We have term limits. It's called the ballot box. For senators, U.S. senators, Florida senators, it occurs every 4 years. For county commissioners, it occurs every 4 years. If the citizens, the voters, want to keep a representative for 30 years, why not? It's their vote. Let them have it. Let them have their choice. Here's what happened in the legislature when I was there. Term limits were passed, and the reason we settled on 8 years was that there were movements out in the public to have them be as short as 4 years. That would have been greatly chaotic in the Florida legislature. What happens when you have term limits is you lose institutional knowledge. And who is left with the institutional knowledge is the lobbyist and the staff, both of whom are controlling bodies. The legislators then become secondary to people who know what happened before when they did thus and so. So I'd like to say one more time, we do have term limits already. It is the voting box. The voters can decide whether to keep somebody or not keep somebody. When I chaired the General Government Committee, Fred Jones was on my committee. He came out of local government, and we had a lot of legislation that dealt with local government. And Fred had been in the legislature for a long time. He was very valuable. He was a very valuable committee member because he knew what the consequences were for local government, and he knew what happened when the legislature did these things to local government, as the legislature has been hell-bent to do in the last several years, preempting local government on such issues as billboards, cutting of trees, etc. So I would urge you to oppose term limits on the grounds that we already have them at the ballot box. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Mr. Thrower, you're recognized.
Yes, I want to echo what Representative Figg said. I completely agree. My notes were exactly the same, pretty much the same thing in terms of when in 1992, when Amendment 9 was passed to limit the term limits to 8 years for representatives and senators. I mean, it left the lobbyists and the senior staff. Those are the ones who have a lot of the power. If you talk to people, I mean, term limits, it sounds great. The public loves it, but it's not good government. And I mean, it doesn't lead to good government most of the time. So I think I agree, the ballot box, if the people want to vote for somebody, especially in the county, you look at this list we were given, most of the counties that have term limits have single member districts. If you got single member and county-wide, hey, if I'm, Harry Cohen just won for South Tampa. In 8 years, if he wants to run county-wide, I should have an opportunity to vote for him if I want to vote for him. To say that we're going to limit it to 8 years and then he can't go countywide and I never get a chance to vote for him, that's just not, I just don't see that as positive. I mean, like I said, I think that's why a lot of the counties that have the term limits are single-member districts. As a matter of fact, Brevard, Broward, Clay, Miami-Dade, Palm Beach, and Orange have single-member districts. Orange has the 6 single-member districts and the mayor at large. But if you look at that, and then Polk and Sarasota also have single-member districts. They all have term limits. There's a reason. There's a reason. So consider that when we're discussing this. And if you want to do term limits, consider single-member districts, adding that. There's a reason they combine them. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Thrower. Ms. Stewart, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to echo what everyone else had to say. I worked for 10 years in the legislature and for the county for 20-something years. There is a steep learning curve, as Mr. Scrolla was describing, and our board serves on so many boards and councils. There is a lot to know to be a county commissioner. It is a full-time job, and it is not to be taken lightly. We're just throwing away the knowledge that we accumulate if we insist on turning them out every 4 years. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Ms. Stewart. Representative Shaw, you're recognized.
Thank you. In a vacuum, I don't support term limits either, for the reasons everyone has stated. But this debate has already happened. We're closing the loophole. This is not us deciding, making up a term limit issue. The voters decided that we should have term limits, and it's my thought process is that we are merely following through on that point, and we're merely following their instructions that they gave us, which were term limits. It's my belief that the musical chairs between districts flies in the face and in the motives and what the voters voted on. So that's why I am likely going to be in favor of term limits in this particular instance. But for all the reasons that everyone else described, I agree. I served in the legislature. I think term limits is a bad idea for a lot of reasons. But I think that we are merely following the will of an already expressed motive of the voters by following through and closing this loophole. That is how I'm thinking of this talk in this instance of term limits.
All right, members, if you've already spoken on this issue, if you don't mind taking your hand down so we can see that electronically. Ms. Delaverne, you're recognized.
I just would like some clarification from Mr. Shaw. When you say, I don't understand what you mean by closing the loophole.
You're recognized, Mr. Shaw.
Sure. I think the loophole is you're supposed to not serve more than 2 consecutive terms on the county commission. But if you come from an at-large seat, then you're allowed to move into a single member district and vice versa. I think that is what I'm talking about. So you can actually serve those 2 terms and then move to an at-large seat and continue your service on the county commission in contravention, I think, of what the voters were trying to do.
So what you're saying is, just to make sure I understand, is that the term limit should be no matter what seat you're in, you cannot have any seat longer than the 2 4-year terms?
That's, yes,
Okay.
correct.
That's what I was trying to understand. Thank you.
Okay. Dr. Fox, you're recognized.
Ask a question, if I may, through the chair. Mr. Shaw, does that apply to, I don't think we've had it happen yet, but that's not to say it wouldn't happen, a county commissioner changing from one district to the next, not an at-large? Would that also apply there as it stands now?
Lawyer, but I am not the lawyer here, so I would probably defer to our lawyer for the board on that one.
And Ms. Farris, you're free to answer.
Ms. Ferris, you're muted.
So you think I would have this learned by now? The charter separates the single member districts from the at-large. So if you have not served more than 6 years, you can qualify to do another term in your district. Once, and for instance, a single member commissioner reaches their term limit, the charter does not prohibit them from going from single member to at-large, and that has happened in the past. So, it is, there is some limit there, but that is what people call the loophole, is that you can go from single member to at-large.
But could you go from single member to a different single member?
No, they group the single members in one group.
Okay.
Right. And then the countywide is another group.
Understood. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
All right. Representative Fig, I see your hand.
Ms. Fig, you're muted.
No, my hand is down. Well, I thought somebody put my hand up. I did not have a question. There's no prohibition against a county commissioner serving his 8 years, staying out a term and then running again, is there?
Is the only requirement if you're making a return to the seat that you held prior, whether it be the same district seat or the same at-large seat, is that you sit out a term. Any further questions? Okay. I don't see anybody on the board. Members, I'm going to take an opportunity just to give you my perspective on this. Part of the reason why I believe this is important, because like Representative Shaw, I too also served in the legislature, and am in theory not for term limits. But what we saw when our initial charter was passed is clear that they wanted 2 consecutive terms as a limitation. And what we're seeing and what we have seen is people jump back and forth. And I don't believe that was the intent of the initial people who put the charter here together in Hillsborough County. If we were to decide to move forward on an issue like this, we would in effect be giving the voters a chance to ratify what their intent was by saying, we don't want people to serve more than X amount of terms in a seat. Now, 8 years, I remember the 8 is enough campaign. At the time, it sounded good. It seemed like that was enough time. I can tell you as a former member that it does take you a little bit of time before you actually understand what's going on. And once you do, it seems like your time is up. But I also believe public service is just that. It's serving the public, and it should not be a career job. And we've seen that time and time again. One of our sister counties is explicit in their charter that they don't have term limits. They've actually been sued over that, and the court has upheld that the will of the voters at the time they ratified their charter in Pinellas was that they were not to have term limits. I think it's different, to Representative Shaw's point here in Hillsborough, that the voters at the time said they wanted term limits. And I believe that if they could have foreseen the seat jumping or the seat hopping, that they would have closed that loophole at that time. Just my thoughts. But I wanted that to be on the record because I do represent an area here. It's such a great debate, folks, and we can't vote, unfortunately. Ms. Delaverne, I see your hand.
So is there an option if, from hearing like what Mr. Scarola said and other people have said about the length of time to really understand the issues, where you keep the term limits, but you make the term, say, 6 years, so people there's more institutional knowledge that's there. Is that an option for us to present to the public?
I would say yes, but I'm going to defer to our attorney.
There's a lot of options that they have before you to decide which way you want to go.
I see Mr. Scarola.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to make mention of the fact that Mr. Thrower's comments just hit me. It took that conversation for me to understand it. And it sort of does tie together two conversations that this board has had and makes a lot of sense that if it was the single member district item, that would be consistent with what Representative Shaw mentioned that the voters' intention would have been in the charter. That might be an option worth talking about. So just saying.
Mr. Thrower, your hand is up as well.
Yeah, and I just wanted to comment, we can speculate what the voters thought when they voted on the term limits in Hillsborough County and what they didn't. The fact of the matter is when somebody's in a single member district and they hit their term limit and then they run countywide and then they get elected by a majority of the countywide voters, I think that makes a statement loud and clear that they want them and they want to vote for them. I mean, that's all I can say. And it kind of gets back to the single member issue. That's why I think a lot of the counties that have the term limits have single member districts. I mean, I think it goes hand in hand. But if you got single member and you got countywide, and the countywide voters are voting on some of these people and they're not voting on others. So I think, to take that away from the voters, I don't know, it's a thing. I think we need to think very clearly about these things because when you put something out there for the voters to vote on when it comes to these amendments to the charter, obviously it is shown that, you put something out there, it's likely to pass. And we got to think of the consequences.
All right, members, any other discussion, debate? I guess it's a discussion because we don't have an issue to debate, right? Mr. Mueller, you're recognized.
Yes, mine's more of a question, and particularly to those that had spoke that have been state representatives and seem to be against the idea of term limits with regard to the state, being a state representative. I guess my question is, because part of the thing was the concern was the loss of institutional knowledge and stuff. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are with your experience, whether you think that equally applies to being a representative in local government, where it's really two different systems. So I just thought I'd throw that out there.
And Representative Figg, Representative Shaw, you're the first two that come to mind that have served, if you want to answer. You're recognized.
I think they're probably very similar in terms of what you need to know and what you need to familiarize yourself with and all those things. And it takes, you're speaking of someone that only served one term, right? So clearly, by the time I learned what I needed to learn, I was not there anymore. But I think the same concerns would apply to state government as would apply to local government because the issues are not, there's not overlap on those issues. So I think the same concerns apply. Again, in this context, the only reason I would be in favor of term limits is because what I think the voters already did. I just want to be clear. I don't usually support term limits. It's just this particular instance. I think in my mind, I'm following through what the voters said. That's all.
And I'll just chime in and just say, I think 12 is the magic number. 8 seemed to be a little short. When I think about, people's lives in terms of 12-year increments from 20 to 32 and then 32 to 44. That's a lot of time to learn. And if we remember our initial discussion when we were talking about the makeup of the commission, we talked about the fact that Hillsborough was unique in that we had our 3 at-large and our 4 district members, and so there were reasons why we didn't want to move to a all single-member district format for some members here. And I think that we have an opportunity to be unique as we craft the term limit language, should we choose to do that, for Hillsborough County. And maybe that's by saying no more than 3 consecutive terms, with a combination of 2 at-large in 1 district, or 2 district and 1 at-large. That way, no one is prohibited from moving, but at a certain point, it's like, okay, let the voters really have a say-so. I will also throw out there that, if we were in this vacuum where you did not have this influx of money that automatically goes to incumbent candidates. If we're going to be honest about those who work in government relations, we know incumbents have the advantage. And when you are an outsider running, if it's about raising money to get your message out, it's extremely difficult, which is why I believe you see incumbents elected over and over again, because they get the money to get their name out to the people. So they have a distinct advantage by being an incumbent, but they also are supported financially because they're in that seat. I just believe the seats belong to the people, and that should be decided at the ballot box, but there's so much money that influences what happens today in elections that I think we need to have some better controls. Just my thoughts. Ms. Stewart, you're recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I have a question for the county attorney. Mary Helen, I don't have my charter copy in front of me. Is there a definition for term? I'm trying to take care of Mr. Shaw's concerns about what the voters said. Is term defined? You're muted.
No, it's not defined. It's just a term, and it doesn't differentiate a partial term and a full term. So it just says 2 consecutive terms. So that would be up for interpretation. But a term in the past, if a commissioner left to run from single member to at large midterm, then if somebody comes in and serves the last 2 years of that original term, that is considered a term. That's how it has worked in the past.
Well, follow-up question. So what happens during reapportionment when everybody has to take a 2-year term, or is that spoken to in the charter?
It is. And remember, the county-wide districts, redistricting doesn't affect them. It's the 4 single member. So what we do is this year we had census. Next year we'll do reapportionment. And once we redraw the lines, the 4 single member district commissioners all have to run again in 2022 because the lines are different. And then you get a 4-year, 2-year term if you're a single member, or they're staggered so that you don't have everybody up for election at one time.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I just have one more comment. I would say that in the matter of money and in the matter of term limits, the voters made decisions that address both of those things on our county commission this last election. Thank you.
Mr. Scarola, did you have your hand up, or?
I did, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of notes. Number one, watching this board of county commissioners operate as long as I have, I've always been a believer that 5 or 6 years before they're even operating at a reasonably good level of knowledge. Here's the problem. The decisions are big. You guys know that. You people know this. The decisions are big. If they're made wrong, they're usually resolved in the court system, and it's usually at the taxpayer's expense. So that's why this institutional knowledge thing is so critical in this.
Ms. Figg, Representative Figg, you're recognized.
Ms. Figg, you're muted. Ms. Figg, you're on mute.
Okay.
Yes,
Is that
we can hear you now. Yep.
Okay. Do I understand? I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, you didn't hear me earlier. My question is for you, if you please. Are you suggesting that we have a total of 12 years, irrespective of how it occurs? Single member or multi-member?
Great question. That would be my recommendation, but I'm just one person.
I think it's a very interesting perspective. Thank you.
All right. Well, is anybody else's hand up that has a comment? Okay. Because on my board, I show none, and I want to be sure. And as one of my former commissioners here in Hillsborough County used to say, it's time to bring this plane in for a landing. We cannot cast a vote on this. Oh, I see Ms. Yates. Attorney Yates, you're recognized.
Mine's a follow-up to Representative Fig and to yours, Mr. Chair, about hypothetically the 12-year thing that you were discussing. How would that work when we have the split with, the reapportionment year? How would all of that play in time-wise? What were you can you kind of think out that out a little bit more?
Nothing would change, to answer your question. If somebody had a partial term that was cut, let's say they were elected to serve 4, but now reapportionment happens, they only got 2 and had to go back to the ballot. We make exceptions now. We have commissioners who ended up serving 10-year terms instead of 8. It would be similar. They would get 14 instead of 12. No difference. Representative Shaw, you recognized?
You're trying to bring the plane in, I know, but I'm going to mess it up. Is it appropriate for us to ask our attorney to draft something that would be acceptable and that would clarify the suggestion you just made about 12 total years? Is that, so that when the time comes for us to have quorum, and if someone wants to put that forward, it's available to us in language that's acceptable?
There's nothing that would stop us from doing that. Any member could meet with the staff and ask them to draft something for us to consider. So that would be appropriate.
Okay.
And we don't need a formal motion to do that. We can just ask the staff to do that, and then at our next meeting, when we have a quorum in person, have that discussion, debate, and go from there.
Can I ask staff to do that now, or you want me to?
The floor is yours, Mr. Shaw.
I would humbly ask staff to draft language in which the chair's suggestion for 12 total years, regardless of at-large or single-member districts, if you could put that in language that would be appropriate for passage and it would be legally permissible, some of us would appreciate that. Thank you.
Mr. Thrower, you're recognized.
Yeah, I just had a clarification. With the county commissioners right now, is it 2 4s and then a 2 every time? And then you serve 2 4s, and then every third term, it's a 2-year, and then it goes back to 4. So I guess if thinking that way, wouldn't it be more appropriate to have 14 years? Because you're never going to have 12, unless somebody comes in halfway through. Am I right? 10, 12?
Because someone could get elected on the 2-year.
2-year, and then they serve 2 4s, and then
They'd be at 10.
10, and then they get elected again, they're 14. So it'd be 14 or nothing. I guess that's my point.
I hear you. My answer to that is let's put it in the hands of the staff and let them work that out for a suggestion. Ms. Delaverne, you're recognized.
I was just going to, in response to that, that's only true for the single district.
Is that correct? I was trying to remember.
Yeah, because the at-large do not get the 2-year because there's no reapportionment.
Okay. I knew there was something with that. Thank you.
All right. Ms. Yates, you're recognized.
That's what I was trying to articulate, Mr. Thrower. That was my question. Thank you for making it a better one.
All right. We're never landing this plane. Just joking. All right. Any other questions or comments? We've got an ask of the staff for our next conversation, an up-down, hopefully. All right. Seeing none, we'll move into new business and talk about the commission district makeups. We're here. We're almost at 7 o'clock, but willing to have this discussion here tonight as well, although we can't formally vote on anything. All right, Mr. Scarola, I see your hand.
Mr. Chairman, and fellow board members, I brought this up because it was my understanding that the last decision that was made based on the the pretense that we were moving very quickly to the 2020 election cycle, and it was too fast for people to be able to absorb, and that we were rushing it, basically. And so it was my thought that we ought to retake this matter for discussion for the 2022 cycle. I don't think the problem has gone away. The population is growing. We know the numbers from our previous discussion, but other than the numbers, you'll recall that I brought up originally that my concern was that unfortunately, the area of the county that I'm from has been chopped up with districts, and they don't quite make a lot of sense. And while this isn't a redistricting conversation, it does have to do with representation and whether we're getting fair representation at a reasonable ratio of representatives per population. So I'd like to entertain continuing this on further for the 2022 cycle.
Now, members, if I recall correctly, and please feel free to say you're wrong, Mr. Chair, on this, the consensus that I gathered from everyone here was that we all agreed 9 was the number that our commission should be at, given the population. The question was the configuration of that 9, whether it was a mixed format like we have now, 9 single-member districts, 7-2, a 5-4, you know, those were the primary concerns, not so much whether or not we should be at 9. Does anyone disagree with that? Ms. Stewart, I see your hand.
Yes, I disagree with 9 anything. Thank you.
Anyone else? I just don't want to speak out of turn here. Ms. Delaware?
No, I agree with what Mr. Corolla said. We've talked about the fact that the population has grown so much. I'm not in favor of all single-member districts because I think it is important having some representation that covers the full county. But I do think when you're trying to reach your county commissioner with the growth of the population, that I'd like us to consider going to adding 1 more for each.
All right. I don't know if anybody has anything else they want to say on this issue. I feel very handcuffed here because we can't move an actual item forward, but we can ask staff to draw something up, not a physical map, but actually the language for what that could look like. So we can have that discussion, hopefully with a quorum in person at the next meeting. Mr. Johnson, you're recognized.
Refresh my memory here. Didn't we already have the county attorney actually draft the language? It would just be a matter of us having the conversation again to be able to bring up for a 2022 decision.
Mary Helen, remind me, did we talked about a 5-4 split last time, I believe?
I thought we had, oh, sorry.
And no, it's okay. And a all single member format. And I think that's where we stopped. I don't think we looked at any other configurations. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Mr. Johnson, this is a follow-up?
Yeah, I think that we had everything pretty much drawn up, I thought, for the most part, outside of just, changing like a couple of words. So I'm not saying bring it back up, or, if Mr. Scarola wants to be able to have the conversation again, then, I'll leave it to the chair and to the rest of the group. But I think that we would at least have all of the, pretty much the, I guess, the drafts that we would really need outside of maybe having Mary Helen change, a word here and there to be able to, to contemplate it. But again, I'm not going back and forth on either one, so I'll let the group decide on that.
Dr. Fox, you're recognized.
Thank you. I'm having trouble with the logic here. First of all, I want to state that I agree with Ms. Stewart. I'm not for 9 of anything. I believe that the combination of at-large and single member that we have is a good one. But I'm having trouble with the logic that as our county grows, and it's definitely growing, that the single member commissioners would have difficulty communicating with a growing number of constituents. But we're not saying that the at-large commissioners are going to have more difficulty communicating when their constituents are growing as well. So I have trouble with that logic. Yes, we're growing. yes, we have to address the challenges of communication. I'm not sure that we've had any specific examples or data that show that we're not handling that communication well. If that does exist, we'd sure like to see it, I think. But how can we say on the one hand, I want to make sure I'm making myself clear. How can we say on one hand that we need to have more of the single member districts because the population is growing, and not address the fact that that same circumstance might be hampering the at-large commissioners as well?
Okay. All right, Ms. Berry, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had this point of clarity on this. I know we talked about this extensively before. Will we still have to go through the same process of making sure that we have public hearings or public meetings with the public in regards to if we decide to go either way? Is this process still applied?
It does. So we would still have to have 2 public meetings before a final vote to put it on the potential ballot. That is absolutely correct.
Last time we were up against the deadline. Is there a deadline this time for that if we do move forward with this?
We are on the shot clock for when our terms expire, which is in February. And it's a full calendar year, Ms. Ferris, right? From the first meeting to the last?
That's correct.
Okay.
All right. Mr. Thrower, you're recognized.
Yeah. Real quick, I've always been a big supporter of the 3 at large and the 4 single member, where everybody has gotten to vote for a majority of the county commissioners. However, with the discussion on the vote and the term limits, it makes me think about the single member. And Mrs. Fox brings up a good point, a good argument for all single member districts. In the fact with the population increase, obviously county, you can make that same argument. The argument we're making about single member districts applies even more to the county at large districts. So that's a good argument by Mrs. Fox, and I appreciate her bringing that to light. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Johnson, you're recognized.
Mr. Chair, I think I'm going to try and help you bring this in for a landing if possible. We're not going to be able to take any action on this tonight, no matter what we do, no matter how much we say on this. I think that Mr. Scroll has made the request to be able to bring this back, if I'm interpreting that correctly.
Yes.
I think that if we're going to bring it back up, if we're going to talk about it, we just need to go ahead and make the decision to be able to do it, as opposed to having the conversation now and then having the conversation in a month because Mr. Scroll has asked for it to be an agenda item. That's my opinion on that matter, sir.
Yeah, the only problem is we're handcuffed for anything binding at this meeting. That's the only issue that we have. So we can ask staff to draft language. Any member could do that on their own. But in terms of actually saying we're going to procedurally move forward is where we're stuck and have to meet again next month. Or at some point in time during the holiday, which we couldn't even vote on that now. Ms. Stewart, I see your hand.
Yes. Mr. Chair, I just have a question of the county attorney. When will the board be receiving the numbers and do the actual reapportionment of the maps of the county?
That is a great question. In the last 2 redistricting that I was involved in, typically we get the numbers in March, but we don't know the exact date. So we have to kind of pre-stage, if you will, and you're familiar with the process where we get the staff in line, the process in line, just waiting for the numbers to come in, because once we get the certified numbers, that starts the clock ticking on redistricting.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, as a follow-up, I would encourage Mr. Scarola to take an active part in the reapportionment, which contains several public hearings. That's the way to solve your problem. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Scarola, your hand's still up. Did you have a comment?
Well, it was more of a question, Mr. Chairman.
Recognized.
Without being able to take a vote, can we ever get this? Is this going to be on the agenda? Can it be on the agenda?
That's my plan, is to put it on the agenda, both items for the next meeting,
All
just
right.
to see where we can go. I mean, it's going to be some fun, but
All right.
if we can get the in-person quorum, unfortunately due to COVID, It's been challenging, but I do want to tell the members that if you had any concerns about it, I think we're pretty safe in here. We're literally in our own plastic bubbles, so to speak. But it is an issue that we certainly will have agendaed next month, along with the other issue on term limits. Great debate tonight, folks. I wish we could have taken some effect, but I understand the situation that we are in. Any other final comments before I close this section out? Okay. Members, before I go to public comment again, at the end of all of the cycles of the charter review boards, a report is pulled together for the county commissioners. And in that report is a copy of your bios and your headshots. Usually we have a group photo, but we're going to have to Photoshop that one together for them. But Elizabeth is going to be reaching out, asking for that information from you so she can compile and pull that report together. In that report are also the issues that we've discussed. So I know there is a sense of urgency that all of us feel. We'd all like to walk away and say we were the board that did X, but keep in mind that we in this report will be telling the commissioners what we debated and discussed and putting it back at their feet to possibly resolve on their own should they choose. So that is going to be an option for us as well in that final report to them. But in the meantime, be on the lookout for an email from Beth asking for that information. If all hearts and minds are clear, I'm going to ask if there has been any public comment that's come about during this meeting. No, I see the heads are shaking no. All right. We don't need a motion for a,
Can I ask
Mr. Thrower's hand.
one question? I was looking online to see, I know they do that report for the Charter Review Board every 5 years. And I was looking for some of the previous ones. I didn't see them out there on the county website. Is there a location for those? And I think if there isn't, I think it'd be beneficial because I think a lot of these issues, whether it's term limits, county mayor, whatever, they come up every 5 years. And I think it'd be interesting to at least have those reports out there so the public, and if they are, I just didn't find it. But I think it'd be interesting to have those reports out there for the public to be able to find for future charter review boards. I think it spurs public comment if people can go and look at it and they can see it and read it. And future charter review board members to be able to look back and see what other boards have discussed and looked at. I just think it's beneficial to have it out there. And like I said, I was not able to see them. I was trying to look for them earlier, and I didn't see any of them, whereas I know in the past they were out there. So I think that would be a recommendation.
I smiled because prior to the meeting, Beth and I were talking about that very same thing, that she's going to send everyone a copy of the last one so we have an idea as an example of what took place. So you're right there with us. I'm not sure if it's on the website. I haven't looked for it, but that's a great idea. It should.
And I'd recommend it, if it's been every 5 years, if you got previous ones, because like I said, there's some interesting. I know when I've served twice, 2005 and 2010, and I went back and looked at some of the ones previous to me, and it was interesting to see. And once we finish and you go back and look at some of the previous reports, it'll be interesting to see the same issue. Like I said, the same issues come up every 5 years. And so it's nothing new. It's just new discussion, new people, new faces. So.
And in high definition this time, right?
So thank you.
Well, members, it's been a great discussion tonight. I wish you all the very best in the holiday season. Please stay safe, hug your loved ones, and I look forward to seeing you all in January. Meeting's adjourned.
Attorney.